And joining us now on the debate, in Washington, D.C., Akin Unver, a professor in the Near Eastern Studies Department at Princeton University. On the line via Skype in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, Henri Barkey, chair of the Department of International Relations at Lehigh University. In Syracuse, New York, Howard Eisenstadt, historian at St. Lawrence University. And joining us here in studio, Atif Kubursi, economist at McMaster University, and Janice Stein, TVO's foreign affairs analyst and director of the Munk School of Global Affairs. And as I welcome you all, both here in the studio and in Points Beyond, let us bring up a map and show you the part of the world that we're kicking off Countries Week tonight. There is Turkey, connected to the Middle East, connected to Europe, connected to Asia. And here are some what we might call fun facts about Turkey. The total population of this regional player is 78 million plus. They are 99.8%, in other words, almost entirely Muslim, and of that group, mostly Sunni. And yes, Turkey is growing. An annual GDP growth rate of 8.2%, at least in the year 2010. Now, I want to read something from the BBC News, just to sort of set the table for the discussion to come, and then we'll have our discussion about Turkey tonight. Turkey is booming, and with its growing economic clout has come a new assertiveness that has led some to wonder if it harbors Neo-Ottoman ambitions to resurrect its role as a dominant power in the Middle East. Turkish diplomats dismiss talk of Neo-Ottomanism. They point out that Turkey is a loyal member of the NATO alliance, an important EU trading partner, and that it remains firmly committed to reforms to make it eligible for EU membership should that moment ever come. Turkey has not always acted in concert with the West. It forged separate and closer ties with Iran. Differences over Gaza plunged its relations with Israel into a deep freeze. Autocratic Arab leaders, including Colonel Gaddafi of Libya and President Assad of Syria, were courted as part of a new policy of zero problems with the neighbors. That policy was swiftly reversed when part of the Arab world descended into turmoil this year. But Turkey has not taken a back seat. Now it presents itself to the new governments of the Arab Spring as a model, a useful example to show that Islam and modernity can go together. And if we needed some evidence that Turkey's role is in ascension, we got it a few months ago on one of Prime Minister Erdogan's road trips in Cairo. This is in September. Treated in a way as a bit of a rock star there. Janice, get us started here. Did Turkey, or the Prime Minister of Turkey, have any influence, do you think, on the Egyptian or Tunisian elections?
Certainly Turkey's experiment is one that both Tunisians and Egyptians have watched with great interest. It's been a very affirming example, Steve, of an Islamist, so-called Islamist party, which nevertheless is explicitly committed to democratic norms. The great fear is that, and based on the Iranian experience, which is only one experience, that an Islamist party runs and wins and never runs again. That is exactly what the Turkish experience belies. Erdogan has run for election several times and is a convincing Democrat in the Arab world. I think that's a very powerful example.
Atif, what is Turkey's relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood like?
Well, I'm not so sure about this, but there are feelings that they're probably close. But the story is Turkey has not been able to leverage all its power and being an example into a very strong influence in the Arab world or the Muslim world, because it comes hobbled with a history and some current problems. There was a survey done by TESEV, which is a research institute in Turkey, that showed that 80% of the Arabs think positively about Turkey. But if one looks to see how important Turkey is in the Arab and Muslim world, one is not able to find any strong evidence. The reason, as I said, is primarily because of its past. The fact that was alluded to by the BBC, that some people really think it's trying to revive its Ottoman stature, and that comes with a long baggage of colonialism.
We will discuss this as we go through the program. Akin Unver, I wonder if I can ask you whether you feel the Turkish Prime Minister had an influence on the outcome of those elections in the Middle East?
Certainly, Turkey's role in these post-Arab Spring elections are definitely one of influence rather than control. That is why when you ask many of the parties there, or when you ask many of the Arabs in the street, you would basically hear that they actually do like the Turkish experience. What they understand from this Turkish experience differs from person to person. But certainly, they do have a positive Turkey ring all the time. But in this sense, I would say that in the Egyptian elections or the Tunisian elections, Turkey would have minimal influence, because Turkey's influence basically grows weaker over geographic distances. Its most immediate influence will be on Syria. That's my reading.
Henri Barkey, the Prime Minister's party, the Justice and Development Party, AKP, is considered to be a moderate Muslim party, and I wonder to what extent you think the Muslim Brotherhood is trying to emulate Turkey's governing party.
Well, there's certainly connections between the Muslim Brotherhood and Turkey's AKP. That said, it's very difficult to say whether they're trying to emulate the AKP. What the AKP represents in the Middle East for whether it's a brotherhood in Egypt, or it's Al-Nahda in Tunisia, or the Justice and Development Party in Morocco itself, which also scored very impressive gains the other day, is that they can make the argument, look, there is Turkey. Turkey is a member of the NATO alliance. It elected a pro-Muslim party in 2002. It re-elected it twice, and the sky didn't fall. And it shows that you can have democracy with a Muslim party in power, especially in a country that was exceedingly secular, fanatically secular. Therefore, it's not that they're emulating the AKP as much as they're using the AKP as a weapon to defend themselves against accusations that they are going to come to power and they'll win one election and that will be the last election. So that for them, AKP is a foil rather than something to emulate, because each of these countries have very different circumstances, and AKP's role model is not necessarily applicable to them.
Howard Eisenstadt, what's your view on that?
I basically agree with what Henri is saying. I think at the same time that while actors in the Arab world are looking at the AKP and looking for a model, they're going to do it. They're going to translate what they see in Turkey into their own frameworks. So one of the things that happened when Erdogan met with members of the Muslim Brotherhood was that he argued for being devout Muslims within the context of a secular state, and that didn't appeal to his interlocutors with the Muslim Brotherhood. I think what we can really see in Turkey's influence is the extent to which it reflects broader desires in the Arab world, a desire for to be able to practice one's religion and still engage with the market economy, still have parliamentary elections, still have governments that are representative of you and your interests.
Atif Kabursi, let me ask you about Tunisia. There's a so-called moderate Islamic party that is running Tunisia now. Turkey's relations with that party and with that country, how do they look at the moment?
Well, they look friendly, and they look, there is some rapport there. But indeed, the issue here is that Turkey represents a specific mall, one in which the Islamic Party is within that fanatically secular system, and the way it relates to that democratic renewal and the ability to win elections.
Did you say fanatically secular?
They are fanatically secular. I mean, the Kemalists and the army consider themselves to be absolutely guardians of that secular experience, and have gone and were at loggerhead with the AKP for several times. The issue here is to what extent the Tunisians would want to be within that framework. There is no question about it that Al-Nahda won a decisive victory, but the issue here is that they still represent 40%. There is all these other forces, and the extent to which Tunisia would want to live within the own mold rather than the Turkish model.
Did I see your eyebrows go up too, Janice, when he said fanatically secularist?
I understand why several of us have used this word fanatically secular, but if you actually look at what's happened in Turkey, the hold of the Kemalists, which is in fact the tradition which we call fanatically secular, has been broken in Turkey. And that's really what makes Turkey so interesting now. Finally, Erdogan has actually broken the grip of the military, changed the judiciary. So this background context of, ideological commitment to secularism is not there anymore in Turkey.
Well, it's maybe not as strong as it once was.
Well, it's really not there.
Not there at all?
I think the core institutions that represented that tradition no longer have the political influence and the political weight that they did. And I actually think that's what makes Erdogan interesting. I hear a tiff about the history of Turkish colonialism, but we have to remember here too that between the Turks came the British and the French, and the memories of the British and French are far more vivid in most people's minds. In contemporary Egypt, for example, the memories of British colonialism are far more vivid than the members of the Turkish
Let me go to
experience.
Henri in Pennsylvania and just see whether you share Janice's view that Turkey is not quite as fanatically secular as it once was.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with Janice completely. I mean, the main institutions that push that secularism down people's throats actually have lost a great deal of power. And at the top of this is the military. The military has been now caged. It's back in its barracks. It has almost no influence in policy anymore. And that's how it should be. It was always an aberration. And the reason they had all this power is because they intervened so many times and they constantly meddled in politics. In fact, to the detriment of the development of democracy in Turkey and to the detriment of the development of the military as a professional institution. This is a military that hasn't been that successful when you look at the war against the PKK. It keeps making mistakes because it has been so much more interested in domestic politics. So that's one. But there are other institutions. I mean, it wasn't just the military. There was a civilian military bureaucracy, there's a press, there's the university system. Now, it doesn't mean that everything has to be changed completely. It doesn't mean that everybody who's in part of those institutions have to be kicked out and replaced by other people. I mean, there's a tendency in Turkey now to, especially by the AKP and people close to the AKP, to try to, if you want, a revanchist type of attitude, which I think is a mistake. But nonetheless, Turkey today is no longer has this Kemalist secular oversight, if you want, of society. But in reality, when you looked at Turkey historically, I mean, you look at Turkey ever since Kemal came to power in 1923, it was never secular. The society was not secular. It was a state that was secular. And everybody else bought this adage that Turkey was secular.
Okay, can I get Alkin to follow up on that?
Sure, I think we have to read what really happened in the military correctly, because it's actually the military apparatus and the high command early in 2000s that came up with this idea that holding on to secularism this much actually alienates a large portion of society and disrupts military's popularity among the public. When you look at the chief of staff in 2000 and after 2005, you would see that gradual chief of staffs come to this understanding, arguing that secularism shouldn't be the most advertised aspect of the state apparatus. This is not new in Turkish politics. Right after the 1980 coup, then the military administration had basically dropped its secular oversight mission and essentially had established alliances with the Islamist groups in Turkey just to extend their popularity across the public. So that's why I think Justice and Development Party did not actually break military secular oversight. It was first the military who actually suggested this idea of military not insisting on its secularist stance so much. Then the Justice and Development Party actually purged these radical elements within the military by the help of the military and by the help of the high command.
Henri, you want to quick back on that?
I actually want to disagree vehemently with that. I mean, we have to remember that in 2007, the military high command issued an ultimatum on the internet in order to prevent the election of Abdullah Gül as president. I mean, this is a military that did not want to give up. Yes, in 1980, they made an alliance because they were fighting the left and they thought the left was more dangerous to them than Islam. But throughout, when you look at the purges that the military conducted year after year after year, it was always targeted against what they thought was Islamists. Their whole rhetoric was about this. And the military lost power in Turkey, not just because they overstepped their bounds in 2007 by trying to prevent the election of Abdullah Gül, but they also lost power because they messed up. They messed up in a fight against the PKK. They were caught lying about casualties. They lost credibility in Turkey because the military was so revered in Turkey. And when they were caught lying, people started to question everything that the military said.
I've got one of you on one side, one of you on the other. Janice Stein's going to break the tie here.
So I'm going to agree with Henri on this and just take this forward because I was in Cairo just last week, and this is actually where I think the discussion of Turkey is so interesting for Egyptians. So model isn't quite the right word here, but what interests Egyptians is how do you put a cage around the military, right? How do you in fact persuade the military, persuade in quotes, to go back to their barracks and do the job of the military and withdraw from active political engagement. Now, we've had a turn, in a sense, in the Egyptian discussion because due to the unexpectedly strong showing of al-Noor, there is now this renewed interest, and here again it intersects with the discussion in Turkey, renewed discussion, is it possible that the military in Egypt can do what the military in Turkey did over a very long transition process, which is guarantee that there will be round two in an election and guarantee some of the fundamental parameters. So there is really deep interest in the Turkish experience, not only in the last 5 years, but throughout the long transition which Turkey engaged in.
Okay, let me see if I can get everybody to focus now on some other relations with some other countries in the neighborhood. And Atif, maybe you'll start out and I'll get Howard to follow up on what you have to say. Turkey and Syria, what's the nature of their relationship today?
Well, it became very friendly after it was very bitter. And then it relapsed in several ways. But the zero problem one, and if we remember that they had a free trade agreement between Syria, Jordan, and Turkey. And citizens of both or the three countries could go without any visa. And things started to prosper. I think the recent events and the Arab Spring has put a dent in this. Turkey is quite sensitive, reticent for any overt support, but it has already received quite a number of Syrians who had crossed the border for sanctuary. And it's rumored, and probably it's true, that Turkey is very active in the support of the Muslim Brothers and the opposition. It held several meetings for the opposition and seemed to have pronounced on a number of occasions very strong positions of support of the opposition and trying to persuade the Syrians directly or indirectly to change the course of their actions.
Howard, let me get you to comment on what has seemed like pretty strong condemnation by Turkey of President Assad of Syria's actions. How has that played out in the neighborhood?
Sure. I think that Syria is a great example of how nimble the Erdogan government has been over the last year in the face of the Arab Spring. They had, as your previous speaker noted, developed very close ties with the al-Assad regime over the course of the last 10 years. Strong trade ties, strong strategic ties. They sort of went into the Arab Spring hoping that they would be able to maintain those ties over the long haul. What happened was that they pressured Bashar al-Assad to engage with reform to address the grievances of his people, to address the unrest in Syria. And it became increasingly clear that the al-Assad regime was incapable of that it had no capacity to reform itself. And very, very quickly, the Erdogan government was able to turn on a head, pivot, and move from sort of a gentle support for a friend to change himself to very active resistance to the al-Assad regime, to support for resistance movements within Syria, to the most vociferous advocates, to an international coalition to sort of force the al-Assad regime to step down. And I think that what the Erdogan government decided was we can't afford long-term unrest. And if the al-Assad regime had been capable of reform, that would have been a best option. But when that proved impossible, the Erdogan government decided very, very quickly and in a very complete sort of way that they were going to do their best to facilitate al-Assad's removal from power.
And Hakan, how do you think that decision is playing in the Arab street?
Basically, I feel that in the Arab street, there is some positive reaction to Turkey's stance against Syria. When you look at the Turkish-Syrian case, in fact, the shift in Turkish-Syrian relations actually represents a shift in Turkish foreign policy, more specifically the zero problems policy itself. And Foreign Minister Davutoğlu himself had said that zero problems policy, especially with Syria at this point, is not sustainable in the long run. Basically, Turkey's popularity in the Arab street is actually an elusive one in many ways, because when you practically and tangibly look at Turkey's influence in the Arab Spring or in the Arab street, what this will give to Turkey is still not quite explicit. So Turkey likes to, I feel, overplay its hand with regard to its popularity in the Arab street. Certainly in the Syrian street, you would see there's a polarization regarding Turkey's role. At least pro-Assad circles definitely do not like Turkey anymore. And I think the most explicit manifestation of that was an attack on Turkish embassy and anti-Turkish slogans being chanted around the embassy and in Syrian cities. But on the other hand, there's one other aspect of the society in Syria who actually support Turkey's role in the Syrian case. And perhaps the most explicit manifestation of that is the Muslim Brotherhood, basically Syrian National Council, one of whose representatives had recently claimed that we reject all foreign intervention except perhaps the one that may be spearheaded by Turkey. So pretty much Turkey's position and Turkey's influence on Syria has caused polarization among the Syrian public. But regarding the rest of the Arab Spring, I think Turkey's influence shifts more towards the positive side.
Let's pick another country in the region, Iran. Henri, why don't you tell us how you gauge Iranian-Turkish relations right now?
Well, I mean, Syria plays a very important role, obviously, in the Turkish-Iranian relations. I mean, because Iran is Syria's main backer at the moment, and it is a strategic partner. The loss of Syria, or the loss of, I should say, the fall of the Bashar al-Assad regime would be a calamity for Iran. And to the extent that the Turks now have completely shifted, as Howard said, pivoted on the question of Syria, is a source of great consternation for the Iranians. But you also have to look at the Turkish-Iranian relationship on a much broader scale. One is that they are neighbors. Turkey doesn't have a choice. It has to live with Iran, and the same is true for Iran. There are strong economic links between the two. And what will happen now is that they will agree to disagree. Clearly the Iranians don't want the Turks to push Assad out, and in many ways, Turkey is going to be one of the most important actors when it comes to getting rid of Assad. That said, there are other issues over which the two countries have common interests. I mean, both countries essentially don't want the United States to meddle too much in the Middle East. In that sense, they agree. The United States, Turkey and Iran also agree very much on the question of Israeli nuclear weapons. By and large, what you see is that the two countries will make do with the conditions, with what they have at the moment on the table. What the Turks do not want, both in Syria or in Iran, and they are petrified with this, is that the current tensions between the West and Syria, or the revolt in Syria, will ultimately bring a foreign intervention, a NATO-like intervention. And the Turks do not want this. They don't want the same thing to happen with Iran. They don't want the current nuclear tensions to result in an American-Israeli attack or an American attack that will essentially entangle the whole region in a war with no end and uncertainty. I mean, you have to remember the most important criteria for the Turks at the moment in their relations with the Middle East and the rest of the world is commercial. I mean, they are very, very interested in selling Turkish goods, in expanding Turkish trade, because Turkey is an export-oriented country, and exports are the most important economic benefit that they have. So they will not want to see instability in the region, and they want to contain. And when you look at the reason, I'll finish with this, the reason why they made a shift on Syria is because the handwriting was on the wall. They decided the Assad regime was not going to survive, and so if you want to minimize instability, you would like to push the regime.
You get out ahead of it.
The sooner the better.
Janice.
You know, essentially what Turkey has done, and it's a big strategic move, is come down on one side in what is a looming civil war inside Syria, recognizing the situation was deteriorating. So, of course, it's going to be vilified by one side and the other side in the civil war, which is what we're seeing already in Syria. We're seeing a low-level, ongoing civil war in Syria, in which Turkey is playing, in fact, a leading role in supporting, both logistically and financially and in other ways, those who are opposed to the al-Assad regime.
No troops on the ground yet, though.
No troops on the ground, but there is...
Can you imagine that?
Can I imagine Turkish troops? No. I think that would be, you know, that's a stretch too far, but virtually everything short of that. Now, that has to complicate the relationship with Iran, because for Iran, the relationship with Syria is such an important ally. So actually, I think there are growing tensions between Tehran and Istanbul over this issue. Yes, there are other dimensions to their relationship, but this is a big one, a potential spoiler in that relationship. And the final piece on this is the government of Turkey is not happy with the Iranian nuclear program. Mm-hmm. They see it as a destabilizing program. And ironically, what you saw in the last 2 weeks was considerable collaboration between Turkey and the United States over a missile shield, which is really designed as an anti-Iranian strategy.
Atif.
Yeah, I mean, we tend to always think of Turkey as an export-oriented economy, and its growth, or the main engine of its growth, has been export-led growth. But exports don't represent more than 10% of the total output of Turkey.
That's right.
And Turkey still does 60% of its trade with Europe, but probably is concerned about entry into the European Union and trying to reorient its economy towards the east. They saw in Syria as an important conduit. I mean, they have the longest border with Syria, and their ability to reach the Gulf has to go either through Turkey or through Syria, and given the Turkish situation and instability, the preference was always for the Syrian one. But there are more things than economics here. And one of the major issues that remain is that the Kurdish element in Turkey and the Alawites. I mean, there are 15 million Alawites in Turkey too. So the situation that water, I mean, one of the major problems that complicate the relationship between Turkey and Syria are these GAP, the Greater Anatolia Project, where they're going to put this huge Ataturk dam with 25 billion cubic meter of water, and is going to already compromising the flow of the Tigris and the Euphrates.
Okay,
and that's becoming an important issue.
There's one country we haven't got to yet that we have to get to, because their relations once upon a time, Akin, I'll go to you first on this. Once upon a time, their relations were terrific, and at the moment, it's hard to imagine how much worse they could be. Turkey and Israel. What's happened to this relationship?
Basically, there are two competing narratives on this. One from the Israeli side, they essentially view the Turkish administration as one of Islamists, ideologically Islamist. And basically, they point to the fact that Turkey had downplayed basically rocket attacks, the damage of rocket attacks. In 2006, they had invited Hamas leaders to Ankara. And basically, with regard to the Gaza situation, the Israelis view that Turkey is basically dealing with this Gaza situation in a really unnecessary matter. But when you ask the Turkish side, they would essentially point to the excessive force usage of the Israeli army in that sense. And there are, I think, two breaking points. One, 2008 Gaza invasion. And just before that, Ehud Olmert was one side of Turkey's peace deal between Assad. And the Turkish diplomats would say that Turkey was actually very close to establishing this peace between Israel and Syria. Israelis argue that this is a very naive reading of that. They argue that Turkey shouldn't have had high hopes on this just because of the fact that Olmert was about to leave. And CP Livni had actually warned prior to that, saying that he's about to leave the administration. The new administration will not support this. But anyway, Turkey thinks the 2008 Gaza invasion as a breaking point. And then you have the gradual deterioration of relations, which reach its lowest points with the Gaza issue. I feel both the United States at this point and Turkey feel that Israel, at least this administration, Netanyahu administration, is becoming really a heavy burden on foreign policy in the post-Arab Spring phase. Because Arab Spring basically dismantled structures, alliance structures, not really alliance structures, but basically non-aggression structures that Israel had established with the rulers of the countries of the Arab community. So in that sense, a breaking down of these alliances, breaking down of these structures, bring a lot of concern to Israel. And in that sense, both the United States and Turkey realize that Israel is becoming this hot potato in their hands that they have to get rid of.
So let me ask Howard Eisenstadt then, if there's probably not an election in Israel for the next couple of years, which means that Benjamin Netanyahu is there for a couple of more years at least, is it impossible to imagine Turkish-Israeli relations improving as long as the cast of characters that is there is there?
Well, I don't think they could be significantly worse, certainly. I think that there's more strategy going on here than the events of 2008 through 2010. It's not that I don't think the Turks felt bruised by the way the Israelis handled the talks with Syria, but I think that in a lot of ways, from the Turkish perspective, the alliance with Israel wasn't a great thing. The alliance with Israel was something that developed under the auspices of the military, both for strategic reasons and to assert the military's control over foreign policy. Part of what the Erdogan government was doing was demonstrating that civilian control of foreign policy was in fact the case. The second aspect of that is that Israel's standing, the public opinion within Turkey regarding Israel has been steadily declining since the first Intifada. It was politically popular, and Erdogan has a keen eye for electoral politics. This is an electorally savvy thing to do. And thirdly, I think it reflects Erdogan's own perspective. I think it represents the perspective of the Justice and Development Party as a whole. I think it represents the perspective of the Turkish public as a whole, namely that there's a tremendous degree of sympathy for the Palestinians, and that all things being equal, Turkish foreign policy should reflect Turkish values.
Janice,
I
last
think
word on
there's
the
both
Israeli.
strategy and values.
You know, I
Turkish
don't disagree with
relationship.
Howard's interpretation of the view of Erdogan with respect to relationship with Israel. But let me also add that there are ongoing current discussions between the Turkish military and the Israeli military. That relationship continues. There are still ongoing political negotiations about an apology from Israel.
Which they insist is not forthcoming.
Well, yes, I mean, that is what the Prime Minister of Israel says, but there is not consensus around that at the senior level in the Israeli military. And these channels are still open and still ongoing, which suggests to me that it is not inconceivable, depending on political changes in the region, depending on how the relationship with Syria unfolds, that one could see at least, if not a 360 on this one, a 180.
Okay, I have no doubt but that we could do the whole program on Turkish-Israeli relations. We're not going to, though, because we've still got so much to cover.
The game is not over, in other words.
True enough. Henri, I want you to opine, if you would, on, well, actually, before I ask you this, let's show some pictures here. Here's last month, President Abdullah Gül going to England and getting a pretty terrific reception from the royal family themselves. And we'll just let these pictures proceed here. Queen Elizabeth, and there's the Prince. And it was a very, very good visit by all accounts. Having said that, Henri, how are Turkish-European Union accession talks going?
Oh.
Well, I mean, look, this is one of the big controversies, and you know, it depends, of course, who you talk to. I mean, the Turks, and you keep reading articles about how the Turks have essentially given up on Europe. They've turned their back on Europe. They're no longer interested in Europe because Europeans have been essentially so hard-nosed, so difficult with the Turks. They haven't opened many of the chapters, accession chapters, because the French or the Cypriots or X or Y or Z has been blocking them. Well, it is true that the Europeans have been very difficult. There's no question about it. But it is also not the whole story, in the sense that the Turks really have a very, very long way to go in terms of reforms. They still have this Kurdish situation at home, which they have not done anything about. They started doing an opening, but that opening stopped. It may continue. It may restart again. But look, let's face it. When you have 20% of your population up in arms, not literally in arms, but when you have serious human rights violations of the sort that you have in Turkey, even under the AKP, it is very, very difficult for me to imagine that the Europeans are going to accept Turkey that quickly. But the fundamental problem with Europe and Turkey has always been a question of perception. Turkey, I think, one day will become a member of the European Union, but this was always a long-term process. The Turks thought that once they signed the deal in 2004, 2005, within 5 years, maybe in 10 years, they would become a member of the European Union. That's not the case. The Europeans, on the contrary, have always looked at this as a 25, 30, maybe longer transition period, because Turkey is not Croatia. Turkey is not one of these small countries of Europe. The absorption of Turkey, especially after the last expansion of the European Union, which now has become so difficult to manage, is a different animal. So from that perspective, I think it was unfair to expect that Europeans would move this quickly. So you had two clashing sets of expectations, and this is the result. I still believe the Turks want to be a member of the European Union, and in the long run, they probably will be a member of the European Union. And what you're seeing now in terms of the press is all chaff, not very serious analysis.
Let's get some feedback on this. Atif?
Yeah, I think Europe has piled one rejection after the other and has really turned its back on Turkey. Now Cyprus is a member. All the East European countries are members. And Turkey is still waiting, and the general statement is that, oh, you have to go through that gestation period. It may take 20 or 30 years before you become a member. But there is also a problem here, is Turkey has always somehow acted upon a presumption that probably is not true, that the European Union is purely an economic cooperation entity. It's more than that. It seems to be a cultural one, and the Turks have not really reconciled themselves to. Turkey economically is already a member of the Customs Union since 1995, and its trade and its activities are and its vigor and vibrancy of its economy has been very much dependent on the European Union. But the story is increasingly Turkey is beginning to refashion, research its way. And it finds in the Middle East and probably in the Turkish Republic of the ex-Soviet Union and in Central Europe, probably a better and a more accommodating
Is the EU making a mistake not admitting Turkey?
Huge. I mean, they made a huge strategic mistake. There's no question about it. It was based in part on democratic performance, but I think there were deeper reasons than that. Frankly, to call a spade, this was Christian Europe turning around and saying to a country like Turkey with 90 million Muslims, you're simply too big. You will shift the balance in the European Union. But here's the irony, Steve. At this point, even though 60% of Turkish trade is with Europe, so there are fundamental economic imperatives that keep Turkey closely tied to Europe, the Turks are losing interest. You take a look at what's going on in Europe right now.
Who wants to be part of that?
Who wants to be part of that economic mess and meltdown that they are seeing in Europe? And increasingly what you hear from Turkish officials, business leaders, diplomats is, we are looking at the Middle East, but never mind the Middle East, where growth is not very promising, frankly. We're looking at Asia, of which we are an Asian power. And you hear this more and more. We're looking at Africa. So ironically, Turkey, I do believe, is turning its back on Europe. It is looking out at the world. It is saying Europe is the past. And so I actually don't agree with Henri that I think this is a broken love affair, but it's broken now on both sides.
Let me get Akin to come in here.
Go
Akin, do you think that Turkey is losing interest in the European project?
I would say yes. And one of the breaking points in that came with the admission of Cyprus and the whole Annan Plan issue. So even the chief Turkish negotiator to EU, State Minister Egemen Baş, actually thought about changing the title of his job, basically chief negotiator of EU, because he said that it's one of the most unpopular things right now. So essentially, European Union is not really, it doesn't have any negative connotations, definitely, but I mean, people no longer talk about it, or you don't see too much enthusiasm or emphasis in the media, certainly. In that sense, is Turkey turning towards the east, is the question generally? Not necessarily. I don't think Turkey is turning away from Europe, but certainly Turkey's pursuing the same kind of strategy that it had employed through the Bush administration. Basically, they argue Sarkozy and Merkel governments are not pro-Turkey's EU membership, so I'll just wait for those governments to change and restart my European Union membership phase when I get more pro-Turkish membership people in Paris and in Berlin.
Howard, do you think the European Union has blown it as it relates to Turkey?
I'm not sure. I think a lot of the conversation up to this point has assumed that the EU and Turkey wanted at some point in the future for Turkey to join the EU. And that may be the case for at least some of the actors. But I think there were strong reasons in both the European Union and in Turkey to go through the process of negotiations, that the process of negotiations itself had utility. In particular, from the Turkish perspective, it increased their capacity to trade on an even basis with European powers, and it acted for the AKP as a type of leverage against the military establishment. Having sort of profited as much as they're likely to on the short and medium term, I'm not sure that Erdogan sees much point in working with the EU at this point.
Atif, a
They've
brief
gotten
follow-up
what
here?
they needed to out of
Can I-
negotiations.
Let me get Atif and then Henri for a follow-up as well.
Yeah, indeed, Sarkozy and Merkel and even the Pope are not too happy about, if we believe WikiLeaks. But there are two players here we have to take into account. One is the spoiling role of Greece. I mean, that Aegean conflict has always played and continues to be an obstacle for Turkey. The other one is the role of the United States. The United States was always pressuring Europe to see that Turkey is, in the name of NATO partnership, would be member of the European Union for all the strategic bargains that the US has always derived from Turkey being at the advanced post on the front line of the Soviet Empire and now on the Middle East.
Henri, a follow-up?
No, first of all, look, the European Union is not a strategic alliance. So I think it was always a mistake for us, and we made the argument all the time when I was also in the State Department, that Turkey should join the European Union because it's such a strategic partner of us. But that's not what the EU is about. The EU is mostly a values community, it's an economic community, and that's where the Turks had difficulty in making the adjustment. But that said, look, we shouldn't look at the problems that Europe has today and essentially look and say that the EU is completely broken, so nobody wants to join the EU now. Turkey should not join the EU. And in fact, there's a certain amount of arrogance that you see in Turkish newspapers and Turkish leaders saying, you know, this is a broken, Abdullah Gül in England said, it's a miserable union. You don't talk about a club you want to join by disparaging it. And that's what the Turks have never understood, that, you know, Europeans are sensitive. Yes, they're not perfect, and they do have problems now, but Europe is not going to have these problems forever. And we have to go back in 2001 when the Turks went essentially bankrupt and they had a huge crisis, and today they're doing very well, thank you. So people do recover.
Janice, quick follow?
Just on this point, actually, I think it's hard for North Americans and Europeans to actually say the Turks don't want to join. From everything I see in Ankara, I don't think the Turks really actively now want to join. The economic problems in Europe are not for today and not for tomorrow. They're probably for the rest of this decade, certainly. The Turks understand this very well. They're a dynamic economy. They're growing at 7.5% a year. They look over their shoulder at this mess, and they've been rejected, and they know they've been rejected, and cultural reasons are a big part of that. And they say, we don't need this.
Okay, we've got a little more than 5 minutes to go in the program, and I think it's about time that we introduced some smut to the program. So here we go. Here's from the Daily Beast from a couple of months ago. A handsome Ottoman prince is hunting in a forest when a cavalcade of horsemen rides up bearing a fateful message. Meanwhile, a slave ship full of nubile Russian women destined for the harems of Istanbul creaks its way across the Black Sea. So begins Magnificent Century, Turkey's answer to Showtime's The Tudors, a bodice-ripping historical soap opera based on the life of the 16th century Suleiman the Magnificent. It's just one of more than 100 shows produced last year by Turkey's booming TV drama industry.
Oh, yeah.
The programs are becoming a wildly popular cultural phenomenon across the Middle East, bringing in their wake a renaissance in Turkey's soft power and ushering in a low-key social revolution among the housewives of the Arab world. Akin, how much soft power through soap operas on Turkish television is helping the Arab-Turkish relationship today?
I would have said no until I read in Reuters that in Gaza, Hamas actually killed the owner of a TV station who's actually showing these Turkish soap operas. So they basically, Islamists in the Middle East see this as a real and direct threat to the society, but people just love these soap operas. I mean, even before this magnificent century, Turkish soap operas were very popular in Greece, not only in the Middle East or in the Balkans, for example, in the Caucasus as well. But when you look deeper into the nature of these soap operas, they do not necessarily portray an Islamic or a Muslim or conservative at all kind of message. They're rather secular, they're very modern, and in many sense, I think these people watch these movies just like they watch Hollywood movies, in the sense that they show them one version of modernity and one version of the West. So there's nothing inherently Middle Eastern about
Okay,
these
let
things.
me make
So
sure everybody gets a
yeah.
chance to speak on this. So Atif, quickly, if you would.
Well, I was in the Middle East, and there are times where the streets empty in Beirut or in Cairo.
Everybody watching TV.
Watching soap operas from Turkey, and people talk about it. Even my family, as if they are members of the family. They were mentioning these names, and I said, "Well, who are they?" He said, "Oh, this is a Turkish soap opera." I mean, they are absolutely important. Whether it can be taken to the point where you say that this is empowering or leveraging the influence of Turkey, I'm not so sure, but it's creating a sort of familiarity that absolutely is a potentially...
That's what I want to find out. Janice, is it real soft power?
Well, it's funny kind of soft power, actually, and I bet we all five would agree. They're enormously, attractive. People watch them all over the Middle East. They're familiar, but they're representing a slice of life, which is equivalent only to Bollywood. I mean, that's the easiest way to think about it. Yeah. And so if you think about the future of this in Egypt, where Al-Noor and the Ikhwan are in power, or the problems this is creating for Hamas in Gaza, this is not necessarily the kind of television, depending on how some of these governments evolve, that they will in fact promote. So there's a great irony that it's that modern, edgy part of Turkey which is reaching out way beyond what one would think.
Howard, is this soft power the real deal?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, clearly there's the soft power, but it's also, soft power is a very sort of nebulous thing. And it makes Turkey influential when it fits local actors' interests. Mm-hmm. Right? If there aren't those locals, the shared interests, then soft power doesn't really mean very much.
Henri, Turkey's about to launch a Turkish-Arab news channel. How much do you think that could influence relations between Turkey and the Arab world?
I don't look. I think all these media things are a little bit exaggerated, and I will tell you why. I mean, Atif mentioned the fact that when he was in the Arab world, there were nobody on the streets because they were watching Turkish novellas. Well, I've been in the streets of Istanbul when people would not go out. When Richmond Pullman, this is an American television series, or Dallas was also, and look how much it got us in terms of soft power in Turkey. I think Howard's point is right. It helps us. It helps Turkey, or it helps whichever country has these novellas. The Mexicans also have them, by the way. When it suits the powers to be's interests, and it's very ephemeral. But it is interesting. There's an interesting connection here to Europe that I think that we missed here. I would look at how many people, when they go abroad, what is their destination? And I would say most Turks still, when they go abroad, they go to Europe. To me, that's the most important sign about the connection to Europe. Now, if you have a similar move from the Arab world of hundreds of thousands of people coming to Turkey because of the soap operas, yes, maybe I will say soft power, but at the moment, no.
Well,
there are actually
tourists coming from the Arab world now.
I was going to say, presumably they're finding something either in the tourism or in the television of Turkey in the Arab world that they can't get at home.
There are large numbers of tourists,
and I think,
Arab tourists, who are actually traveling now
Istanbul
to Turkey
is a destination.
Is the destination.
Yeah.
Huge.
Who did I hear trying to get in out of town?
Henri.
No, that was Howard. Go ahead, Howard.
Janice, you're right. There are tourists now, but it's not the huge numbers that we're talking about.
Well,
we should not...
Okay, Howard, you wanted in. Stand by. Howard Eisenstadt, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight how important it is for Muslim viewers to see an image of modernity that's being produced and acted out by Muslims. It's true that many of these shows don't demonstrate a religious lifestyle necessarily, but they do represent Muslims being modern, Muslims being successful, Muslims being educated, Muslims being able to control their lives.
Steamy,
And that is a very attractive
But that's
thing.
happening everywhere.
They're steamy. This is a steamy side of life that you're actually getting. And
Okay, you know what? We have to stop this conversation because we're on the verge of getting an R rating here, and we can't have that happening. I want to thank all of our guests for participating in tonight's program. Akin Unver, the Near Eastern Studies Department at Princeton University in our Washington studio. Henri Barkey, Chair of the Department of International Relations, Lehigh University. At Bethlehem, Pennsylvania via Skype. Glad that worked out so well. Howard Eisenstadt, the historian at St. Lawrence University out of Syracuse. Janice Stein, the head of the Munk School at U of T. Atif Kubursi, the economist from McMaster University, here in our Toronto studios. Thanks so much, everybody.
Pleasure.
Thank you.